Back for the second time this week, the CBB Central podcast, coming at you with some previews today, and it's a special one, Brad, because we're doing our homer previews. Going to do Providence, your alma mater, Northwestern, my current home, and kind of break these teams down. I'm really excited about this, Brad, because it gives me a chance to bounce my ideas that I can't tell if they're just fan ideas or like actual good basketball analysis off of you. You can kind of do the same thing for me. So how's it going, my man? Good speaking to you, talking some hoops today.
Yeah, it's going pretty good. I mean, we got some lively discussion about the RPI replacement, the net, right? And then we have some waiver talk to get to. And then, I don't think I'm too biased when it comes to Providence, but I mean, you'll be the judge of that today. But I think even most Providence fans in general, like just being like Rhode Islanders, you kind of skew toward negative, like the sky is falling. I know, like when I first started going on the message boards, like 2012 or like 2011-ish, they were very, very active because I mean the sky is falling. You're going 4-14, and now I mean there's hardly any activity because things are going so well.
Yeah, it's funny. I was on the Northwestern board the other day, just kind of skimming around it. I haven't really ever posted there, but I wanted to look and see what the talk was. And people were like debating like Chris Collins and like, was he a good recruiter or not, and things like that. Like, are they really better off without Bill Carmody? And I was like, wow, like people really change in like a year. Like Chris Collins was God a year ago to these people, and he has one bad year, and all of a sudden the sky is falling. So it's always interesting. I mean, if there's no in between with fans, I think it's the biggest thing. It's either you're going to come down too hard because you love them so much, or you come down too easy because you love them so much, and that's what makes college basketball so much fun. But let's get into these rankings. This new system to replace the RPI, the NCAA evaluation tool, also known as the NET or NET, is what we're going with here. A few of the highlights on this one: it's going to rely on game results, strength of schedule, game location, scoring margin, net offensive and defensive efficiency, and the quality of wins and losses. The scoring margin is being capped at 10 points, which seems a little low to me. Touch on that as well in this little bit. To me, this seems like an improvement. I'm going to take it with cautious optimism, as I do with pretty much everything I look at with the NCAA. It's definitely a shift towards more of a predictive metric than just a results-based, the way the RPI was. But it'd be hard to do much worse than what the RPI was doing, Brad.
Yeah, so a couple of things. So, I mean, everyone has been like unanimously saying, oh, this is so much better than the RPI because the RPI was so outdated. But, I mean, we don't even know what this is. I mean, they gave us the components, but, our Twitter friend Eric Haslam, I think, put it, most succinctly is, we know the ingredients, but we don't know when to use cups and when to use teaspoons. Because the first thing that jumped out to me when I saw the release was the scoring margin cap being 10 points. And what this seems like to me is that the NCAA was told by the analytics people that scoring margin was very important, but they didn't want the scoring margin to kind of influence coach behavior. So they wanted it to be part of it because the analytics people told them to, but they didn't want coaches to play for running up the score. So I think the 10 point was something that they did where it's high enough that it's not that high, but it's high enough to be double digits while not high enough where coaches would actively game plan for it.
Yeah, I think I don't hate the idea of a cap on it, just because I don't think it values anything to have to really give any value to say Cincinnati beating up on Savannah State to open the season like they did last season. I think they won 105-55 or something like that. That doesn't provide anything, but that 50-point scoring margin would impact things. To me, I think I'd rather see a slightly higher cap, maybe something in the 15 to 20 range that would still really cover a more wide range of scenarios. A 10-point game can be anything from a game that the game was kept at arm's length the entire time to a super close game that becomes 10 and fouling. There's a lot 10 points is not a lot in college basketball. I think if you were to up it to 15 or 20, you would open up for a little bit different outcomes. And I don't personally have too big a problem if a team wants to score down the stretch of a game a couple of times and make it from 12 to 18. I don't think that is such a horrible thing that the NCAA needs to avoid it at all costs and potentially impact a ranking system that's going to decide who makes the NCAA tournament to a certain degree. But yeah, I mean, I think Eric did a great job of summing it up. I once I saw this, immediately hit some of my analytically inclined folks like Bart Torvik, Eli Betker, Eric Haslam, guys like that. Just wanted to hear what they thought. It seemed like most people have that skeptical optimism that it will be an improvement over the RPI just because everyone accepted the RPI was really bad, but we really won't know until November.
Yeah, I think in terms of the scoring cap, I had tweeted 22-25 when I first saw it as like my ideal scoring cap. But like the more I think about it, I think 15 is probably a fair compromise between the people that don't want, God forbid, the team runs up the score and shows bad sportsmanship versus people who want this scoring margin kind of taken into account. The kind of most interesting part for me is like how much is this going to be weighted? Like if you're down by like 3 points and you foul and that becomes 5, like how much weight is this going to have? Like our team's going to have to make like a real decision of like to trying not to foul because like the scoring margin is going to be like so impactful, or is this going to be a minor thing? I think with only 10 kind of 10 options of points, 1 through 10, it can't have too big of a too big of an impact on the overall rankings, I would hope. And then one of my Twitter followers today actually brought up a good point. Tweeted me, is there a cap on losing margin? So like if a team loses by 40, will that count as 40 or will that count as 10? No, I didn't read the release kind of in depth enough to know, but I think it would be weird if you cap the winning and not cap the losing.
Yeah, I kind of assumed. I didn't see anything in the release when I did read it over that said it was capping losing, but I would assume they're capping it at 10. Otherwise, it would be pretty weird. I do like that they're taking into play things like efficiency, other statistics that I think we all agree need to be more involved in the selection process in terms of these predictive metrics, things of that nature. And once again, the RPI wasn't the be-all, end-all. The last few seasons, they've added things like Ken Palm, KPI, Sagarin to these team sheets. But I hope this just really helps the committee make a more informed decision. But the NET will be used as the sorter, just like the RPI was, for quadrant purposes. What do you make of, Brad, them not publishing the algorithm, not giving us history or giving us, say, the 2017 data and showing us how they'd rank? Because to me, I think it's very consequential for programs looking to schedule for the future. I mean, people understood how to game the RPI. I think it's doing coaches and programs a disservice to not put this in front of them now, so that when they're making their schedules for future seasons, they know what type of teams to look for.
Yeah, it's like this is the most important thing that you have to kind of understand when taking into account our decisions, but we're not going to tell you how you get a good net rating or like what you need to do. I mean, they've given kind of the pillars, right? I think that's what they call like the 5 big components, but without the weights, I mean, it's totally useless. And I saw, I think David Hess, who's another analytics guy on Twitter, saying that he thinks that it could be a neural network. And so for my minor in grad school, I was business analytics, and for one of the presentations, I had to present, like as a part of a group, right? Like the 3 different predictive models, like decision tree, regression, and neural networks. And when I Googled neural network, it said like when presenting this to your boss, it might be better to go with a linear regression, even though the neural network is more accurate, because it's like super difficult to explain and to grasp. So I have no idea really what it is, I just know that when you kind of run when you hit run, it comes up with the best results most of the time.
How about that? Putting our educational knowledge into the real world. You love to see it. Anything else on the NET before we touch on these waivers that seem to be going out in droves now?
Nothing else for the NET, but in terms of waiver news, yesterday was the day before rather, was a very big day for NCAA waivers as Anthony Mack, who transferred from Wyoming to Miami after sitting out the season at Wyoming with a concussion. Hanif Cheatham, who left after like 5 or 6 games at Marquette, going to Florida Gulf Coast. And then the last one was
Blake Harris.
Blake Harris from Missouri to NC State, also played a handful of games. All received waivers. Anthony Mack isn't as surprising because he sat out all last year with the concussion. Even though normally you would have to sit a year. But Harris and Cheatham is very surprising because they both played last season and they were supposed to be eligible at the mid-semester. So it kind of gives some hope for some other potential waiver candidates. I know Carlton Bragg, they're trying to get one at New Mexico for him. Obviously, Mustafa Heron is the big name waiver candidate as well.
Yeah, there's a bunch that are trying to get them, and I've heard from a lot of people around college basketball that they're seeing these waivers and they're going to keep applying for them. Guys that didn't expect necessarily to be eligible are just going to throw their hat in the ring, and it definitely seems like the waiver's back. I know we had a little bit of like a couple year, I don't know how we'd call it, what we call it. Hiatus. That's the word I was looking for. There's been a couple of years where we haven't seen these waivers given out. They got rid of the hardship waiver. Now it appears that they've just kind of started giving them out again. I know at Iona there's 2 that will be looking, Asante Gist and Boubacar Diakite from Eastern Kentucky and St. John's. Diakite missed all of last season. His case seems very similar to that of Anthony Mack, so I'd start to think he gets that waiver. But definitely interesting. I mean, I tweeted my thoughts on it the other day. It's so tough for the NCAA to play judge and jury on whether a player is deserving of a waiver. So you either have to give them all out or give none out. And it seems like they're going to go swing back towards giving them all out after a couple of years of giving none out.
Yeah, I mean, there's no rhyme or reason to it at all. I mean, like you have no idea what
constitutes
getting a waiver. Like before, it was the sick relative or like your parents getting fired was like the shoe-in. So when like Ernie Ziegler got fired from Central Michigan, Trey Ziegler could play right away at I think Pitt, if I'm not mistaken, or a TCU. He went one and then the other. Same with Billy Barron from URI to Canisius when his dad got fired as head coach. There may have been one more in there that I can't remember, but it just opens a can of worms. No one has any idea what's going on, and it's just even more chaos. If you're going to sit out and you don't want to sit out, why not just file a waiver, see what happens?
Yeah, it's going to be really interesting, and I think the NCAA kind of handled it poorly because they don't come down clear on what everything is. Not that it's easy to come down clear because, I mean, you can't be like, well, only parents and grandparents who are suffering from terminal diseases, but uncles and aunts are not accepted. Parents who are just ill but not terminal. You need a doctor's note. Like there's just there's no rhyme or reason to which you can't just lay down a fundamental groundwork. You just kind of have to. You kind of have to take each one on an individual case-by-case basis, but that becomes very difficult to do because then you start dealing with precedents and why would Boubacar Diakite not get one if Anthony Mack gets one, and then the next kid gets one? What if the NCAA doesn't want to give that one? It's such a tough thing to manage, and I think this is an easy way for the NCAA to take the pressure off of not allowing players to be immediately eligible from transfers. When you have somewhat of a valid excuse, they just give out the waiver. I saw that kind of being thrown out there, and I think there's actually some weight to that reasoning.
Yeah, I mean, it would be a PR nightmare, but the NCAA, in terms of if their sole goal was to make the waiver process as transparent as possible, yeah, they need to give an outline of what diseases are okay, what's the appropriate relative relation, exactly how many games you played, all this, but that would be a nightmare to say, this this illness is okay, this one's not. Like you're a grandmother that's not good enough, but your mom is. So we're
Yeah.
gonna have to deal with the system as it's currently constructed.
Yeah, and we'll certainly see which transfers are able to play right away this season. Certainly could change a little bit the landscape in college basketball this season. Let's move on to our deep dive previews. Let's start it off with Providence, Brad. Your team just coming off a 3-1, I believe, trip to Italy. It was finished up their games today with a blowout victory. And Brad, before you kind of give the rundown on this team from last season, I know you watched one of their games overseas. It's been kind of tough to follow. What did you see from this new look squad before we kind of look ahead?
Yeah, so they obviously lost to that Italian team, which apparently had a couple former Division I players. I didn't recognize any of them, but supposedly Wesley Pearson from Troy was on the team. But like they certainly didn't look out of place, like playing a high major team. Like it wasn't like, some of the games Providence had last year against like Stony Brook and Brown, where it's like, this is the end of the world. Like Providence is playing horrible. Like the season is flashing before our eyes. I mean, Providence played okay. Kind of had some rebounding troubles in like certain lineups. Also had a lot of turnovers, especially from their point guards, which was my major takeaway, is that point guard play is the primary concern, even more so than the 3-point shooting, because they actually shot the ball okay. But point guard is the biggest and most primary concern. And then how are they going to divvy up the minutes between the 11 guys that could potentially make a case for the rotation?
Yeah, yeah, it's going to be really interesting to kind of monitor this team because they do have such a good incoming group. But before we touch on those incomers, I mean, let's look back at what Providence did last season, Brad. And I'm sure you could sum it up better than me, but 21 wins on the season, another NCAA tournament. This was a pretty veteran club led by guys like Rodney Bullock, Kyron Cartwright, even Jalen Lindsay. All three of those guys do graduate. This team wasn't a great shooting team, but they were pretty solid defensively overall last season, and they lose some of these very veteran pieces. That's the biggest thing I've been kind of wondering about is the point guard spot without Kyron Cartwright, who is just so steady, maybe not a superstar, but just made the right play every time, and just to replace that with a freshman or a sophomore is always difficult.
Yeah, so the kind of the big turning point for Providence was in the preseason when Emmett Holt was had the abdominal surgery and then missed the rest of the season. He obviously averaged 12 points a game as a junior the year before, but kind of the bigger loss was having a big man that could step out and shoot and still guard post players. With him at the 5, it kind of created a lot more space for Cartwright, who I think probably looked better as a junior than he did as a senior. Playing Young and Watson those kind of major minutes at center a lot of times kind of shrunk the court, and they were a lot worse as a shooting team, especially as the season went on. They shot the ball well in the non-conference, and then slowly got guys like Malik White and Isaiah Jackson saw their percentages go from like the 50s to the 40s, ended in like the mid 30s for 3-point percentage. Their kind of the best lineup was with Rodney Bullock at the 5, and then Jackson, Lindsay, and Diallo in there with Cartwright, and then Malik White was actually closing games in the early part of the season before he suffered a leg injury in that abomination of a game against Brown where they almost lost in overtime, and that kind of set him back. He never really found his stride after coming back, and then early season injuries for Cartwright and Diallo too. Kind of, and then Jalen Lindsay and Rodney Bullock missed games here and there. It was just like a very disjointed season where coming into the year I thought that they were going to be a top 25 team, and then Holt's out for the year, and then there was a point in time in the non-conference where I just thought let's just get to the tournament. Like, who cares how ugly it is or like what seed we are? Let's just get there. Like we're struggling against Stony Brook and Brown, and had that crazy loss to DePaul in mid February, but then a strong postseason run in the Big East tournament before losing that first round game against Texas A&M.
Yeah, I mean, I was at the Houston versus Providence game at Mohegan Sun last December, and just remember them being so beat up. I mean, Kyron Cartwright, he played, but he was just not healthy. He only gave him about 6 minutes. Alpha Diallo also was not healthy. Neither was expected to play. I remember Coach Cooley telling us post game that both of them just basically told him they were going to play, and and Coach Cooley basically wasn't willing to stop them. But obviously they were limited because they were just not effective. I think they were both dealing with ankle sprains, if I recall. Bullock was awesome. They were getting blown out for most of that game, but then they made a little push, just not enough. Lost that game 70-59. That was a fun one to be at. But it's definitely a new look club, and I'll run through the 4 newcomers. There's David Duke, the top 50 recruit out of Cushing Academy, combo guard, 6'3", number 47 in the composite. Just a super talented kid who made waves with a big dunk that was on SportsCenter last week on this Italy trip. He's paired with AJ Reeves, also a Massachusetts product, 6'5" 2 guard, number 48 in the composite, the number 9 shooting guard in the class, and then 2 pretty good, more developmental level prospects, and Jimmy Nichols, who's 188 in the composite, a 6'8" combo forward who can shoot the ball a little bit, do a little bit of everything on the floor, and Chris Monroe, who's a very good shooter, 6'7", pretty big guy for the small forward spot at 324 in the composite rankings.
Yeah, so Duke is probably the biggest in terms of both impact and buzz, like in terms of an addition. I mean, he's from Providence. He went to Classical High School, which is about 2 exits south of PC on the highway, before going to Cushing for the last 2 seasons of his high school career. I know Rothstein compared him to a Chris Dunn. He has that great size and length and athleticism at that point guard spot, but like Dunn as a freshman, he's going to need a lot more seasoning. I don't remember which kind of Providence analyst or whatever said this, but he is not as good of a defender as Dunn, but he's a better shooter at this stage. So that kind of gives you a kind of perspective on Duke, and he should definitely battle with Makai Ashton Langford for that starting point guard role. And certainly based on that one Italy game I got to watch, Duke is much better than Ashton Langford, even though Duke had a poor offensive showing in that one.
Where do you stand on Makai Ashton Langford? Because he was a guy who, former UConn commit out of Worcester, was a guy who was very highly regarded out of high school and just did not show it at all his freshman season. Averaged about 4 points, 1.5 rebounds, 1.5 assists, was very inefficient, did not shoot the ball well at all, turned it over a fair amount. Just an overall very disappointing season from a guy a lot of people were penciling in as a potential Big East Rookie of the Year candidate. Where do you stand on him in year 2? And obviously in the battle for point guard with David Duke, and where do you see his role going forward with this team?
Yes, that's an interesting question, because I think most people, this is a very polarizing topic, where I think some people were like, he was terrible last year, which he was, and he will continue to be so. And then there are the people who are like, well, he was a top 40 recruit. He was great for like the first 5 or 6 games before kind of oddly falling off a cliff. His best game was probably against URI, which came in early December, where he was legitimately very good. I think I kind of fall somewhere in between. I think it's not necessarily wrong to still have faith just based on his recruiting ranking, because he clearly has shown throughout his high school career to be a worthy and high level prospect who played in the knapsack. He played on a very strong AAU team, the Mass Rivals AAU team. In terms of this season, I think he's the starting point guard. I think he probably plays slightly more than David Duke. I could see that being like a 22-18 split. But both players are not great shooters. Duke is a better shooter than Ashton Langford, and if Ashton Langford is turning the ball over and playing out of control, there's really no reason to play him. he's not like an excellent defender. He's a good defender. He's great at getting to the rim. But last season, when he would get fouled, he would miss the free throws, and that kind of hurt his kind of willingness to take it to the basket. So he's that's a very polarizing topic. I think I'm kind of in the middle. I think he'll be at least a serviceable point guard as a sophomore this year.
Yeah, I'm generally inclined to lean towards Duke just from an outside perspective, being that guy at point guard. And I guess the question then becomes is how do the minutes really shake out? Because you have Duke, you have Ashton Langford, and you also have Malik White, who, as you said, closed some games last season. He was a pretty valuable piece. You can play some 2-point guard type looks with either with two of those three on the floor. It's a little bit of a smaller backcourt, but I think you can do it. But do you think it's possible that one of these three guys falls out of the rotation altogether? Because if Ashton Langford continues to struggle, you start to wonder how long you're going to stick with him. And if Duke establishes himself as the point guard of the future, you have to wonder about how long Ashton Langford will truly be in a Providence uniform.
Yeah, I mean, if Duke wins the starting point guard battle, I should probably phrase it like this. I think Duke is the least likely to fall out of the rotation. Like, I don't see any way that Duke's not playing rotation minutes this year. And if he wins the starting point guard role, and then Ashton Langford's coming off the bench, that's usually the sign of a transfer, when a player in the grade below you in the same position kind of beats you out. Now, I mean, Providence fans have seen Ryan Fazekas beat out Jalen Lindsey for a year in that same kind of, Fazekas was a freshman, Lindsey was a sophomore. But then the next year, obviously, Lindsey beat him out, and then Fazekas transferred. So it's not necessarily a done deal, but it does make it a lot more likely that you're kind of out of the picture. In terms of White, I think White's a lot better next to a point guard. I think he's better as that kind of off ball. Kind of like the secondary creator, and the team's going to need his shooting, and hopefully he can provide like a scoring punch off the bench. I think he should be in the rotation, but I think out of the three, I think it's most likely that Ashton Langford falls out of the rotation, but also most likely that he's the opening day starter. So I think he has the highest ceiling and the lowest floor for the season.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was thinking as well. So I'm glad that the more informed guy can kind of fill me in on that one. And then this kind of wing glut that Providence has, because just like with Rodney Bullock, who's that kind of 3-4-5 combo, they don't really have. They have a lot of positionally versatile players on this roster, between guys like AJ Reeves, who's more of like who's like a 2-3. You could play Jimmy Nichols and Chris Monroe, should be able to factor in at the 3 or the 4. Alpha Diallo, Isaiah Jackson, a very versatile player. And how do you see kind of the wing minutes settling in? Because Emmett Holt's going to have to find a role, whether he'll play the 4 or the 5. You've got Nate Watson who's there up at the 5. I mean, how do you really see the whole rotation really shaking out, but especially kind of the wing spot with this mix of youth and experience?
I mean, I have no idea how this rotation is going to shake out. I mean, they have 11 guys that you would say are worthy of playing in the rotation. I think everyone besides Monroe at this point. I mean, he was a sub 300 recruit. He seems to be, based on kind of the tweets and kind of observations I've been seeing from this Italy trip, has been the last player off the bench. He's certainly a good shooter, but I think when all this buzz about Jimmy Nichols as like an impact piece, and then I thought he played really well in the loss to the Italian pro team that I watched. He's long, he's athletic. He was great at the top of the press, like pressuring the ball. He's great on the offensive glass. He had a few very athletic putbacks. He didn't get the ball a ton on offense, but I know people who have been to practice have told me that he's like an excellent shooter, and he can put the ball on the floor a little bit. So he's certainly in the rotation. He's someone, if you just looked at kind of recruiting rankings, he's someone who would be out of it, being ranked in like the 180s. But he's going to be in. So that's 11 guys. I honestly don't know how they're going to break it down. In this foreign trip, they've been breaking up the minutes pretty evenly. But I would guess if anyone falls out, it would be Edwards, even though he's played pretty well, I guess, in this Italian trip. I would say Edwards, and then maybe Khalif Young falls out and holds the backup five. But I mean, it's really unclear. I mean, your guess is probably even better than mine at this point.
Yeah, I was thinking Edwards was the guy I saw falling out, unless of course a guy like Reeves doesn't live up to the hype. Just because we haven't really seen a ton from Drew Edwards in his college career that indicates he's beyond what he's shown in terms of he's an okay shooter. He can play the one or the two, but he's not an instant impact guy. He's not a guy who's going to come off the bench and give you a massive spark. Where I think Reeves might be better served in that 6-man type role where he can bring a lot of energy on both ends of the floor. I think he's better suited for that role than Drew Edwards. I mean, coming into the podcast, my thought process for a starting lineup was probably going with Drew Edwards, not Drew Edwards, wow. David Duke, I apologize. David Duke, Isaiah Jackson, Alpha Diallo. I was thinking probably then probably Reeves and Watson round out that lineup. So that's 2 freshmen starting in the backcourt together. And then you have you close out the rotation with Malik White, Mekhi Ashton Langford, Jimmy Nichols, and Emmett Holt. Holt, I think, will need some time to get back into game shape. Won't necessarily be ready to play like a 30-minute a game role, but he can play both that 4 and the 5 spot. If that's our 9, with like Khalif Young being the 10th man and Drew Edwards being the 11th. I'm a little concerned about the shooting that lineup would produce, that starting group, but that positional size would be pretty impressive.
Holt has looked, like not totally out of place. I mean, he looks noticeably smaller, like in terms of like his physical build. But in terms of his game, like he looks, fine in this one Italian game. I know that Cooley said he's about 60 to 70% right now. So hopefully by the start of the year he'll be 100%. And if he's 100%, I hope he's starting, because he's one of 2 players that have been a consistent starter along with Alpha Diallo, and both of them have scored in double figures. So they're gonna really be relied upon to bring the scoring, because a lot of these guys, the shooting isn't as much of a concern for me as like the like offensive creation, like who can get a shot, because like Ashton Langford and Duke have kind of the like ball handling capabilities and the speed and stuff to get a shot, but they're both not great jump shooters, and both of them kind of struggled against that bigger and stronger Italian team to finish at the basket. And then, I mean, Diallo isn't a shooter. Watson is a very good low post scorer, but the team is just kind of short on guys who can take you off the dribble and get a shot that way.
Right, and I think that's a pretty big concern, especially when your kind of offensive focal point in Alpha Diallo isn't a very good shooter. Last season, Diallo shot, I'm just trying to get the number up here, just 21% from 3. It took about 2 a game. It wasn't really a factor from there. He's so good getting looks from the mid and the high post and doing different things, getting to the rim. But how much shooting progression do you see from him? Because if he can develop that 3-point shot, he becomes a really dangerous 3-level scorer.
Yeah, his mid-range game is excellent. He's a great free throw shooter, which people have said, like the analytics people on Twitter say that like free throw shooting is a better indicator of future 3-point shooting than like current 3-point percentage in terms of like projecting to the next level. So that would kind of indicate that he could improve. He doesn't get much lift on his shot, so that kind of requires him to have a lot of space. I think maybe he could get to the low 30s. I mean, he's not someone when he shoots a 3, I kind of groan, like an Ashton Langford or like a Drew Edwards, where they maybe make a shot, but like you really don't want them shooting 3s. I mean, Edwards is a guy who's had some like huge shooting games, especially as a freshman, but he's in there to be like a steady kind of defensive presence. he's not much of a ball handler. He's just kind of like a kind of glue guy, 2 guard, who can defend ones, but he's certainly not someone you want playing extended minutes as the one on offense. So it's just kind of like a shortage there. I know Reeves has shot the ball well in this Italian trip, so if he's in that starting lineup, like you kind of projected there, that could be some additional shooting as well.
The final guy I wanted to touch on is Nate Watson, mostly because I saw him on the NBA Draft.net top 100, and I had seen him play a fair amount last year, and I was like, he's a pretty tough guy to guard inside, but I didn't never see him as an NBA prospect. Is there something I'm missing here?
No, he's like a wrong era guy, where he's a back to the basket scorer. He's like a good free throw shooter, so maybe he could extend his range, but he doesn't rebound at all. It kind of appears like he's kind of tentative to not pick up fouls. That's kind of like the vibe I get from watching him in terms of rebounding and defense. So he's not a super aggressive player on that end, but he's definitely someone who you can give the ball to in the post and he can get you a basket or get fouled and knock down some free throws. And that's going to be a legitimate option to get points for this Providence team who really need that interior scoring presence. But in terms of an NBA prospect, I don't think so, unless he makes major strides in terms of rebounding and defense.
Yeah, I pretty much agree. I just wasn't impressed by the rebounding numbers. I don't see him getting to a point where he can switch at all, defend on the perimeter. Just all his only good skill is being a post scorer, and that's not really a skill that's valued at this point in the NBA. So I have to agree on that. Brad, you had to make your 9-man or 10-man rotation today. What would it be?
All right, so my 9-man rotation would be Action Langford, Jackson, Diallo, Holt, and Watson as my starters. And then Malik White, David Duke, AJ Reeves, and I guess Jimmy Nichols. That means no Khalif Young and no Drew Edwards. Both guys who have been, well, at least Young has been in the rotation both his years at Providence. Edwards has kind of been in and out, but those are two juniors to be out. I mean, it seems kind of doubtful, but it's a very, very difficult cuts need to be made to get to a big 9-man rotation. And in the past, Cooley's never really even doled out a true 9-man rotation. Like last year, there were 4 guys who played 32 minutes a game, and then Jackson played 20 to 25, and then there was kind of leftovers for some guys coming off the bench. There wasn't much of a even distribution like you'll see on some deeper teams. So maybe he adjusts this year.
Yeah, it's always an interesting kind of thing to monitor is how do coaches adjust to having more depth than they've had in the past. Now, where do we stand on Providence overall? I think for me, it's an NCAA tournament team. I don't think it's certain that they're a tournament team, but I feel good enough about Ed Cooley. I feel good enough about the talent this team has. I feel good enough about Alpha Diallo that I think they do find their way into the NCAA tournament. Probably in a similar range to where they've been the last several years in that 9 to 11 range. I don't think this is the year they can make that jump. I think next year, once they bring in Greg Gant, once this young core has gotten a year older, once potentially a guy like Mekhi Ashton Langford blossoms into his own, I think that's when you could see this Providence team take that next step into a top 5 seed, a team that can make a big run in the NCAA tournament. To me, I see this more as a bubble team in the mid pack of the Big Ten, Big East. Wow.
Yeah, so I have them fifth in the Big East, behind Villanova, Marquette, St. John's with Heron, and then Xavier. I have them as an 8 seed, which would be 32 overall. So that's the last 8 seed. So right in that 8-9 range again. The two biggest concerns for me are obviously the point guard play, which I'm most concerned about, and then second being shot creation. I know that's something where in the past they've kind of relied too much on the point guard to create shots, out of pick and roll primarily. But I think that running the flex with this bigger team with guys like Diallo with the 2 and Jackson with the 3, could also generate some offense, even if they don't have a ton of guys who can create off the dribble.
Yeah, I think that's like totally a good point. And on the flex, and overall, we have to do our where do we stand on Ed Cooley. I'm a very big Ed Cooley fan. I've been a big Ed Cooley fan since Fairfield. I think he's a great coach. I think he's one NCAA tournament run from getting the recognition he deserves as one of the best coaches in college basketball. He recruits extremely well. He's a good guy. He does it the right way. Certainly no issues with job security. The question is, would he ever leave Providence? And it seems like no. He really loves it there, from what I've heard and seen.
I mean, he makes over $2 million a year. They just built a practice facility that's opening in like a week or two, which were, I think, his conditions. The practice facility was like a big condition for him to stay. And I know, there was a time where he wasn't getting his top recruiting targets, like Donovan Mitchell and like Abdul Malik Abu, even though Bentel turned out to be a much better player than Abu. But I know that was concerning for a little bit. Sede Kita was another one who they really wanted in the class of 2016 and ended up missing on. But in the 2017 class, they got all the guys they wanted, being Watson and Ashton Langford, and then Dejor Dickens, who obviously left pretty recently. 2018, they pretty much got everyone. They got their top two guys in Duke and Reeves. And then 2019, they got their top guy in Greg Gant. So it looks like the recruiting is up. The practice facility's in, the money's coming in. I mean, there's really no obvious reason for him to leave.
So I believe that wraps us up on Providence, an NCAA tournament team again with Ed Cooley, a Big Ten mid-pack team with the chance, of course, to blossom up those rankings if everything kind of breaks right. Let's move on to the second team we wanted to look at today. That would be the Northwestern Wildcats, coming off a season in which Brad picked them to be really good. I think top 15 nationally, Brad.
It might have been 11th overall, but I don't remember.
And it all really went downhill. Northwestern goes 15-17, 6-12 in the Big Ten. They lose their final 7 games to close the season. Bryant McIntosh was never really healthy. Scotty Lindsey played incredibly inconsistent basketball. They had no depth. They had a very difficult time defending in man. They didn't shoot the ball very well. They got to a point where they found a little bit of a stride where they were just kind of slowing the game down, playing some zone. That made their defense good enough that they could have a chance to win offensively, but it didn't really ever pan out. They never really made that run that I'd hoped they would. The closest thing they had was they had that big win over Michigan at home. They were playing at All-State Arena, which was certainly a big letdown. Not being able to play at Welsh Ryan. That's about an hour drive from Evanston. So students had a tough time getting to games. Fans had a tough time getting to games, except for opposing fans, which had no problem getting from downtown Chicago, where many Big Ten alums are based, to All-State Arena out near O'Hare Airport. They just never really made a push. Every time they had a great performance, they followed it up with 1 or 2 lackluster ones. It was an incredibly frustrating team to watch, and they're just kind of going to try to flush this one from their memories. There's still a lot of talent on this team, and Chris Callens still has a really good recruiting class coming in, and despite maybe the little bit of luster that's been lost after that NCAA tournament run and the sparkling early signees that came in before the season began last season, Northwestern, I think, is still a program in pretty good position.
So, Kevin, I wasn't totally crazy picking them so high last year. I mean, I wasn't the only one who had them in the top 25. What do you think was the biggest reason why they went from that NCAA tournament team and projected almost unanimously in the top 25, to being in towards the bottom of the Big Ten?
That's a really tough thing because it wasn't necessarily just one individual factor. I think a lot of it was they were overrated going into last season beyond belief. Even if they had lived up to their talent level, this team wasn't that talented when they made the NCAA tournament. Everything broke right. They had a lot of they were. I wouldn't want to call them just a lucky fluke, but things went their way. They won close games. There was a magic about that team, and they played together and they played hard and they were good defensively. They had guys who made big shots. Bryant McIntosh was terrific. And then just some small incremental losses you wouldn't think meant a lot, like a guy like Sanjay Lumpkin leaving for graduation. That was huge because it meant that Northwestern, I would say 80% of the time, was playing a lineup where Bryant McIntosh, Scotty Lindsey, Vic Law, and then either Gavin Skelly or Aaron Falzone and Derek Parton. That was their five. Now, McIntosh is a below average defender. Scotty Lindsey is a below average defender. And Gavin Skelly and Aaron Falzone are below average defenders. So whenever you could get them in a 1-4 pick and roll, you were screwed on defense. And they just didn't have the offensive firepower that I think people thought they did, because Scotty Lindsey really took a step back offensively. Bryant McIntosh wasn't healthy, but he took a step back offensively. It was just kind of this perfect storm of like everything that went right the year before went wrong last season.
So one of the major reasons why I was so high on them was, all right, so they returned 4 starters, but then they get Aaron Falzone back, who was a starter the year before, but missed the season in between with an injury. I thought he comes back, he steps in at the 4, and they pretty much have 5 starters back. Falzone can stretch the floor. It's great. But obviously he didn't live up to any of the expectations that myself or others put on him. What kind of happened with Falzone?
So I didn't watch a ton of his freshman season just because I really wasn't all that tied to the program at the time. Although what I do remember, I mean, he was a fairly athletic guy who really shot the ball well, who could play that stretch 4 spot, put it on the floor a little bit. He was an impressive player, but I think it was one of those situations where the injuries really hurt his ability to be aggressive, and it also just took that step of quickness away that he did have. Made him an incredible liability on offense, or not on offense, on defense, excuse me. He was never that good a rebounder to begin with. And so what he was last season was virtually just a 3-point chucker who shot 37% from 3 at the 4 spot. But at times he was not even that good. He had a lot of times when his 3-point shot was way off. He was really streaky to the point where I didn't think he was playable last season. I thought I don't know that there's any necessarily hope that he improves this season. I watched him play for the Malta national team in like the FIBA World Cup for small countries, and he put up big numbers offensively. But like when you watch the games, you came away very unimpressed with his ability to defend it all, with his ability to put the ball on the floor. I remember one time I turned on the game because I saw he had a big stat line, and he immediately travels and then gets blown by for a bucket at the other end. He's just not all that coordinated with the ball. He's basically just a pick and pop 4-man who doesn't do much else. And I don't really see there being much value in that archetype, except on a team that's desperate for 3-point shooting the way Northwestern was last season. I think they've got a little more of that this season.
So another player who kind of fell off a cliff after a strong, I think, freshman season, but Isaiah Brown was a guy who a lot of people thought would be a 6th man and like a quality 6th man last year. He also was not, living up to that expectation. What happened to Isaiah Brown?
He was on that tournament team. He was that perfect 6-man spark plug off the bench. And for some reason, he kind of fell into Chris Collins' doghouse. And I think the problem is you couldn't really play him at point guard. Whenever you played point guard, he just didn't run the show all that well. I mean, Anthony Gaines wound up being the backup point guard down the stretch and actually started a few games when McIntosh was out with injuries. He inspired no confidence as a point guard, and at 6'2", he was just a defensive liability when he was playing the 2, which was just a tough recipe for him to get minutes. He had a couple of games that were impressive, where he'd show flashes and find his way back into the rotation, but overall, it just seemed like him and Chris Collins never meshed. And then obviously he transfers after the season, headed to Grand Canyon. I think it's for the best. I just once I saw Anthony Gaines starting when Bryant McIntosh wasn't available and Isaiah Brown really just getting spot minutes, even with McIntosh gone, I kind of knew that his time at Northwestern was coming to a close.
And my last question on a former Northwestern player. So when I posted my preview of Northwestern last season, and I I put it on I think the Rivals forum of Northwestern to get some feedback. The biggest, kind of sticking point that the fans kind of insisted to me was that Rapolas Avanaskis was going to be in the rotation. I think he was hurt all last year, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
So if he were healthy, do you think he would have made a difference?
He had been hurt the season before, and so I watched him their scrimmage, and he just looked really out of place. He still was trying to find his way, and then he got hurt again. He was a good recruit out of high school, and I think there was a lot of hype about him, but I think the injuries really took a toll, and it was never really feasible for him to find rotation minutes. I don't think at Northwestern. He's going to go to Colgate. I wonder if he has a chance of a waiver because he's never actually played a college game despite being in college for 2 years already. He might be a waiver candidate for them, which would be a really good piece in the Patriot League, given he was a former top 150 recruit, and he's got very good size. I know he can shoot the ball a little bit. I think a lot of people saw him as a poor man's Gavin Skelly with a lot more upside, and he just that's why all I saw was a very poor man's Gavin Skelly in the scrimmage. Although, granted, that was 8 minutes of basketball, so I don't have too much of a hot take there on Rap, as he's known.
So should I go through the incoming players, or do you want to handle this?
I can handle it. So Northwestern's incomers, it's as much about who they didn't get as who they did with this class, and who they didn't get is Jordan Lathan, the former top 150 recruit who had been labeled by everyone as the point guard of the future in Evanston. His admission stunningly revoked on a Friday evening, classic Friday news dump in May, right before I was about to leave for a formal. Actually, it was pretty horrible timing. But anyhow, I pumped out a few tweets that night, but it was just absolutely crushing. The prospect who had some big time offers, chose Northwestern. It just took a lot of luster off this class, and he was seen as a guy who was expected to step in right away and start a point guard. They were unable to find a guy who could do the same thing late in the process as maybe a grad transfer, but it's still a very good class. So I'll run through here. Headliner is Pete Nance, brother of Larry, son of Larry Sr., who is number 88 in the composite. I've seen, at one point was a top 60 recruit. He's very, very skinny at 6'8". Lists at 180. I'd be surprised if he's even that. He's got a ton of upside, a lot more skilled than Larry was when he came out of high school, and even when he came out of college. From what I've been told, he just has to put on weight. Miller Kopp is the guy who has the clearest path to being a rotation player and the most ready to play of this recruiting class. 116 in the composite. Another guy who had a ton of high major offers. 6'6" shooter who can score at 3 levels. Good strong body. Going to be a really nice piece for Northwestern for 4 years. Ryan Young comes out of Bethlehem Catholic in Pennsylvania. 6'10" power forward who has some skill. Can also play in the post. More of a developmental guy, 346 in the composite. I'd be surprised if he plays in the rotation this year. And finally, the late signee, 2019 reclass point guard, Ryan Greer, a 6 foot, listed as high as 6'4" by some people, so I have no idea actually how tall he is. He comes in at 341 in the composite, but given Northwestern's need at point guard, it wouldn't surprise me if he carves out significant rotation minutes. He's a guy who put up big numbers on the Under Armour circuit. And so to me, is a guy a lot of people have kind of let their ship sail on, for next season, but I think he's going to find a way into the rotation. Then they have one transfer who becomes eligible this year, AJ Turner, sat out coming from Boston College, a good shooter and secondary creator who might get some point guard duties this season. And Ryan Taylor, the high-level shooter, Missouri Valley scoring champion last season at Evansville, averaged about 21 points on 41 or 42% shooting from 3. He's a super impressive scorer and can fill that Scotty Lindsey role without difficulty.
So which of these freshmen do you think plays the most impactful role? Is it Greer, holding down the point guard position?
I don't expect Greer to start at point guard this season. I think he more is just a backup, especially if Jordan Ash can't establish himself as being able to play point guard. So I'll say Miller Kopp. even though the path to minutes a little bit more difficult. I think he comes off the bench as a fairly impactful six-man type scorer. Good size, just can do pretty much everything on the floor. I've heard some good things about him. I think he plays in that 15 to 20 minute range. I think Greer's more in like that 10-minute group. Nance might find minutes. I'm a little less optimistic of that just because he's not very ready physically. But if Northwestern wants to play a true four, I do think he'll play a little bit more than I think a lot of people are expecting, because I think there's a lot of people who think Vic Law is going to play the four.
Yeah, I think Law will. I mean, based on having to have AJ Turner and Ryan Taylor in the same lineup, along with Law, I think that makes Law the power forward. Although he's not kind of like a more bulky combo forward. He's someone who I think you want defending perimeter players, right?
Vic Law followed around the best player offensively last season for opposing teams because he was the only plus defender on the team. He's very good defensively, man-to-man. You don't need to do that quite as much if you're going to start a Turner, Gaines, Taylor group than you are when you're starting McIntosh, Scotty Lindsey, and Gavin Skelly. But yeah, Law's going to guard more just your best guard, and Northwestern would have a little bit of trouble guarding some stronger fours, although I think you'd be willing to give that up in the exchange for the athleticism and shooting and switchability that some of the lineups that Northwestern can send at you.
Okay, so Ryan Taylor, right, averages over 20 points a game at Evansville. Then you have Vic Law, who's just kind of maybe potential NBA prospect, 3-and-D type of player. Are those the two best players on the Wildcats? And if so, who's the team's best player?
Well, I actually might say that the best player on this Northwestern team is Derek Pardon. He was so important last season. He was a leader on this team. There was a lot of chemistry issues with Northwestern last season. There was a lot of rumors of issues between Vic Law and Scotty Lindsey. I can't confirm those, but let's just say I wouldn't be surprised if those were the case. Derek Pardon was a leader on this team. He's going to be the vocal leader this season. He's 6'8", does a great job on the glass, protects the rim, very solid in the post, a good passer. The free throw shooting has improved every year. He's just a player who's improved every single season. He's my favorite player on this Northwestern team because he plays so hard, makes so many plays. To me, he's the best player on this club, at least the most important. And then from there, you have Vic Law, who's this like 3-and-D intriguing prospect who's never really put it all together as a scorer, only averaged about 12 points a game last season. He's that good like scorer, secondary creator type. That's the thing, is Northwestern's roster's really been built around these secondary creators who are big wings. Like Vic Law, secondary creator, defends, very versatile. AJ Turner's kind of in that similar mold, although not as good as Vic Law. Taylor's kind of a ball stopper, at least he was at Evansville. But he can really score the ball and also distribute a little bit, but not necessarily as a point guard. They have so many of these guys where you don't want him to be your primary point guard, but like Vic Law wound up playing a lot of point last season when McIntosh went down, where Anthony Gaines would be like the quote-unquote point guard, but Law would wind up bringing the ball up the floor or at least running offense through him to get like pick and rolls where Vic Law would be the ball handler. So Northwestern's offense really has to change because last season they were super pick and roll heavy, which like made sense because Bryant McIntosh was their point guard, and that's pretty much what they've been the entire time that Chris Collins has been here because Bryant McIntosh has been there. But I think they really need to transition from just like pick and roll to like more of like a spacing, free-flowing offense with a lot of cutting, allow for the shooters to create space, and then 4 out, 1 in, play out of the post with Pardon who can distribute out to shooters.
So then what are your expectations for AJ Turner? I mean, he's a guy who has very good size for the wing. You know, you mentioned he's an ideal secondary creator. Showed a lot of those skills at Boston College. I think he was a near double-figure scorer. I think he averaged like 8 or 9 points a game. What are your expectations, coming off this sit-out year?
My gut feeling is he'll start. He averaged 8.5 points, 3 rebounds, 3 assists, and led the ACC in assist-to-turnover ratio. Shot 37% from 3. He's 6'7". There's a lot of talk about how good he's looked in practice as a good like rotation player from what I've been told. So there's a lot that's kind of unknown, but I think his ability to pass the basketball, shoot the ball, keep it moving, is very valuable on a team that has such point guard questions. So I definitely think he will start, at least to begin the season. If I had to project a lineup, I think what they'll go with from opening day is Anthony Gaines will start at that lead guard spot that Chris Collins plays, where he'll have the ball, but I don't think he'll be ball dominant. I think they'll really be interchangeable between him, Ryan Taylor, AJ Turner, and Vic Law. Those four guys will handle the ball a lot in this kind of spacing offense. That's a plus defensive lineup. Now, Ryan Taylor wasn't that good defensively at Evansville, but I think that part of that's just he had the ball a lot on offense and had to conserve energy. I think that Anthony Gaines and Vic Law are plus defenders. Turner and Taylor should at least be average. So right there, you've got a super switchable four, a group of four guys who can all shoot the ball except for Gaines, who can all attack the rim. And then you have a 5-man in Pardon who does everything else, is a good passer. I think that 5 can actually make some noise.
So you're going with the no point guard look, with Gaines, who's more of a wing player at that point guard spot, with all these secondary creators. Do you think that now, like Chris Collins gets this reclassification from Ryan Greer? Do you think that he's still going to use this? Does he have any expectation or loyalty to Ryan Greer to have him be the starting point guard after getting him to come a year early?
I don't think so. I think Greer was a guy who was one of their bigger targets in 19, but he was going to be behind Jordan Lathan, where they were going to be willing to play 2 point guards, but it wasn't like they were considering Greer as a guy who was going to come in instantly in 19 and be like an immediate starter because they were going to need him as their starting point guard. I don't think that's ever what he was recruited as. I think once they lost Lathan, they realized a significant need at point guard because the only point guard on the roster would be Jordan Ash and then Gaines potentially, who got those minutes last season against Michigan State. Like in that first half against Michigan State, but Northwestern exploded at Allstate Arena. Gaines was the point guard and made a lot of really big plays, both defensively and offensively. And Vic Law was terrific offensively. Now the offense stagnated in the second half, partially Gaines' fault, partially Law's, partially just everything blew up in their face. But you saw the potential for an offense where Vic Law was going to have the ball on his hands, but Gaines did a lot, would bring the ball up the floor, break pressure, things of that nature. I don't think there's a loyalty to Ryan Greer to start a point guard by any means right away. I think he does find a way into the rotation in maybe a 10-minute a game capacity. But it'll be really interesting to watch the dynamics of this point guard spot, because if Anthony Gaines can man it in this lead guard type of role, there's much less need for a guy like Jordan Ash, who is a senior on this team, in comparison to or a Ryan Greer. I think there's not room for both if Anthony Gaines can play point guard competently.
Yeah, so in terms of my projected rotation from the outside perspective, I had Greer at the 1, and then Turner, Taylor, Law, Pardon, rounding out that starting 5, and then my 4 reserves, I had Gaines being the 6th man, then Kopp, Peter Nance, and then Barrett Benson, who's the one guy that we haven't talked about. So first, what's your kind of bench rotation, and then what are your kind of expectations here for Benson?
Yeah, so my bench 4 would be either Greer or Ash, whoever winds up being that backup point guard. I would lean Greer, but Ash is more experienced, so he might get those minutes. Kopp, and I think Pete, Nance, and Barrett Benson, definitely Benson. Just a question of would it be Nance, Ryan Young, or Falzone? I would be surprised if it's Young. I would say more than likely it's Nance. Benson's a guy who always looked a little slow last season, not physically slow, like he couldn't get up and down the floor, but slow, like the game would come, like the game was too fast for him still, which was concerning as a sophomore. But he really started to play well down the stretch. He had a couple of games, I think the Iowa game, where Northwestern was literally just out of bodies, and Northwestern played like a Derek Pardon. It was the Iowa game to end the year, and then Penn State. He was really good. He had 8 and 10 against Iowa and 9 and 9 against Penn State. where Northwestern was playing two bigs of Pardon and Benson, which was like a complete nightmare to watch from an offensive perspective. Northwestern lost both of those games like fairly handily, but like Barrett was pretty awesome. And so I'm excited to see a Barrett Benson that's much more flexible offensively, much more comfortable with the ball in his hands, attacking the rim with strength. He's a guy who's very big and at times was hesitant to dunk the ball, hesitant to go up in traffic, would lose the ball a lot, just didn't play with a lot of confidence. And so I'd love for him to be able to let Derek Pardon get some rest and let Derek be as effective in his minutes as he can be. Derek had some foul trouble last season, so for Benson to step up as a meaningful contributor as a backup center, it would certainly be a welcome sign for Northwestern. I think he probably fills a 10 to 12 minute a game role. He averaged 9.5 minutes a game last season before being that senior center once Pardon does graduate.
Okay, so I'll go into where I have Northwestern in the Big Ten and nationally, and then I'll let you finish it off here. But so the biggest parallel, like when I see this Northwestern team, it makes me think of Georgetown from 2 seasons ago, where I had Georgetown, I think borderline top 25 this season, because they had so much talent. They had LJ Peak, Rodney Pryor, who were two of the best players in the Big East that season. They had two really good bigs in Jesse Govan and in Marcus Derrickson, and they had Isaac Copeland, who ended up leaving halfway through the year, but he was someone I was always enamored with as a prospect. But just kind of the one thing, they had so much talent, but they didn't have a point guard, and they ended up using Jagan Mosley as their point guard, and some LJ Peak as well, and Mosley was a freshman in that top 100 to 125 range. The season was pretty much a disaster, and that was the last year, I believe, of John Thompson III. Maybe he got 1 year after that, but I think that was his last season. And I see a lot of parallels between that team and this Northwestern team, where they have some legitimately talented players. I mean, Vic Law's a NBA prospect. Ryan Taylor's probably a fringe NBA prospect. Turner has proven that he can play at the high major level. Pardon has certainly proved it, but it's this point guard I think is holding them back, which is why I have them 11th in the Big Ten and 82 overall, which would put them as like a 6th seed in the NIT. But I mean, if they get competent point guard play from one of these non-point guards like Gaines or a guy like Ryan Greer, then this can certainly be an NCAA tournament team. But just kind of based on kind of past teams that have had these point guard problems, that's where I stand here on the Wildcats.
Yeah, that's pretty fair. I will say it's crazy to think about, but this Northwestern team, in my estimations, now I'm no Northwestern historian, but there is a legitimate case, and I don't even know how debatable it is, that this team has more raw talent than any Northwestern basketball team ever. Like, how many times can we say that about a team on a podcast and not have enormously high expectations? Now, I think this team is going to be, the point guard concerns are very relevant and very real, but I think they're going to be a much better shooting team. Turner, Law, Taylor is a dynamic 3-point group plus Kopp. They're going to be much better defensively. They're going to be a lot more switchable. They're going to be a lot more athletic. They're going to have a really good big. They're going to have some experience. They're going to start 3 seniors and a 4th-year junior in AJ Turner. I think when you lay out some of these ideas, it's not at all hard to see them being a top half Big Ten team. I think would be the number. I'm going to have them at 8 or 9. I think, and just outside the NCAA tournament, in like a preseason projection or a realistic projection, I would say more like a top 3 NIT team, top 3 seed. But it's really tough because as much as Gaines isn't really a point guard, Northwestern looked competent in that look last season without any real prep in doing so. They never planned to do this. Now they really struggle offensively, but that was more because, in my eyes, it was more just the team's dysfunction and the team's lack of shooting more than Gaines' inability to bring up the ball and Law's inability as like a second creator. I thought those were fine. But like in the Michigan State game, Gaines had 10 points, 5 boards, 4 assists. The following game, Gaines 6 points, 5 assists. He had 6 assists, 9 points and 6 assists against Iowa. I think he can be that guy. And that's really my optimism. And if he is that guy, I think they're an NCAA tournament team. I think they have a chance to be not only an NCAA tournament team, but like an 8 seed if these things break right. And I don't know how realistic I am in projecting these things breaking right, but it's certainly exciting to think about the potential of this roster because they have that type of 4-out 1-in spacing that I fall in love with every team. And so the fact that it's with my favorite team is really, really kind of fun. The problem is I don't know that Chris Collins is the X and O coach that's going to maximize that because he's such a heavy pick and roll guy. I'm really interested to see how that changes this season because if it doesn't, I think it really severely handicaps the upside of this club.
I think that does it for our Northwestern talk. I know we talked last time that wanted to touch briefly on Siena. I don't know if you prepared anything for Siena, but I mean, we have a couple minutes maybe that we could go through.
No, I mean, I don't have anything prepared. I mean, I'm excited about the future of the program. I think they're recruiting really well. I think the staff's really good. I just don't, there's nothing to be this year. I think they're going to struggle. I think they'll be competitive the MAC, but I don't think there's anything necessarily there to say. I mean, just in depth about this team. They've got some good recruits in the pipeline for 19 that they're trying to land in terms of like top 20 New England recruiting report guys that would really change the way this program is headed if they could get some of these guys like a Tyler Burton, a Preston Santos, a Meek Adams Woods, guys of that nature. But until they land those guys, I don't think there's much to say on Siena.
It is interesting to note that they have Braden Bear, who was a Syracuse walk-on, who was on the court. I'm pretty sure in the Michigan State game, right, where he kind of led that comeback by not messing up too much, standing there in the zone.
Yes, Braden Bear will be a rotation player on the Siena team.
6th man.
Yeah, I don't know what he's going to be, to be quite honest with Siena. I mean, like, I don't know what they're like really have in mind rotations-wise. I think they're going to start like a freshman. I think they're going to start like Kadeem Smith in the backcourt next to Khalil Richard, which is like one athletic guard and one like tiny combo guard who scores it. And then they'll play this a third guard in Jalen Pickett, who's this like Draymond Green of guards, as he was described by his AAU coach. He's like a really good defender, switchable, can shoot it a little bit, do a little bit of everything. And then they'll probably play up front. They'll probably play like a small ball 4 in Manny Camper, who's super athletic, and then Sammy Friday will be their 5-man, who's like a super energetic big man who had 15 rebounds against Louisville and then fall off the face of the earth last season.
So the 3 returners, Shivers, Herder, and Fisher, they're destined for the bench, you think?
I think they'll all be on the bench unit, but like Shivers could easily start at the 4. Fisher might start at the 5. Herder's good, but like sometimes doesn't look at the basket, so it's kind of tough. I mean, if only he shot the ball like his brother, he'd be a lot more high on the hopes of Siena fans.
And then, I mean, I know absolutely nothing about Bryant. I know that we talked about maybe mentioning something about them earlier, but I took a look at their roster. They're returning a lot of guys, but when you're ranked 340th in KenPom and you return guys, that's not always a necessary jump. And I mean, I didn't go to a single Bryant game my 1 year there. I mean, if I were to go to a Bryant home game, that would mean I'm missing like a good Big 12 game on a TV or something. So that just didn't interest me at all.
Yeah, I think Jared Grasso is going to do a really good job with that program. He brought in a good grad transfer and Byron Hawkins from Murray State, a good JUCO kid. For losing his name, I think like Juan Cardenas from Odessa or Midland College, one of those Texas JUCOs. So I think they'll be pretty good, like mid-pack NEC team. That's my Bryant prognostication. In case you tuned into this podcast just for the Bryant talk,
our minute of Bryant talk. I was like, I like looked at like these guys' profiles and stuff. I don't think I've seen any of those guys like throughout my 1 year there. I mean, I'm not on on campus or anything like very often, but you would think that you would see some of these like tall guys walk around, but
Yeah, you never know. I mean, I know my Northwestern guys, like Anthony Gaines is literally everywhere on campus. Like my first semester at Northwestern, I saw Anthony Gaines like 4 times a day. Rappy Ivanowskis, who transferred, was in a class with me. I had a class with, I'm trying to remember. I had one more guy that I had a class with that I liked. Isaiah Brown was in my stats class. But that's kind of it. I haven't really seen the other guys. I never once saw Brian McIntosh on campus. I don't know if he ever went to class, but I'm not going to question that. He got a degree. Shout out to him. I think that wraps us up on the podcast today, Brad. I don't know if we need any more discussion on our players and when we see them on our ways to class. So,
no.
Thanks for listening, everybody. We'll be back at some point next week. I know we just wanted to record this one. Brad's got Providence fever because they just finished their trip and he got to watch Providence basketball. And I'm always down to talk Northwestern because it seems like they get no preseason hype. So thanks for listening. Be sure to chime in the comments. Tell us how biased or unbiased we are. We always appreciate any and all feedback. Hope you have a great night.